But also provide about that being more
It's one of those treatments that may or may not be faith healing, but I've always found, even if the science is accurate behind it, that the efficacy is higher if you do believe these things.
Actually, we've got a newsletter. I'm amazed at how much they've smartened the place up compared to the St George's
So we're going to start one day, but if we keep the sponsors in, and then if he turns up, we're going to cross.
Yes.
I'll be around anyway, just to sort that out. Carl's coming in too.
They've really done a nice job of it.
Yes, it's very nice, yes.
Right. A warm welcome to Bewdley Festival this afternoon. I'm delighted you could make it. We're in the company of Martin Wall and Richard Clay this afternoon, who have come to talk to us about the 50th anniversary of a film that was screened as a play for today called Pender's Fen. Right, thinking of that last time. And today's Mired in Pender's Fen, I believe, is the title of the talk that we're going to hear. Just a couple of things from me before I let them crack on. It is our 38th Bewdley Festival, which is an immense achievement. Only once were we called off, and that was due to COVID. Obviously, we have to thank a whole range of people for putting on these events. So we've got sponsors, we have volunteers to thank for this organisation, the committee, patrons, friends, and Wire Forest Books as well, who support us admirably in pretty much every event we do. If there's any safety issues, you'll be ushered straight out in the right direction, so don't panic about that. I really hope you are fascinated and enjoy this enthralling talk. I won't say any more now, but I'll leave it to you guys to carry on. All right.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Well, as you just heard, this is an afternoon exploring the work of Kimber-based historical author Martin Wall, who's over there, and in particular the influence on him of TV film, as part of the play for today's season, that was made in the early 1970s, Pender's Fen. Now, Martin, if you've not come across his work before, began with some self-published historical fiction, and then he started to get wider recognition with his works on ancient and early medieval history. Good example of this was the Anglo-Saxon Age, and another, Warriors and Kings, which he has copies for sale. More recently, though, his career has taken a different path, and he's written two books that are perhaps a little bit less conventional, The Magical History of Britain and West, Tales of the Lost Lands. The second of which, West, fuses local history, personal memoir, and visionary fiction. We do have some copies with us of The Magical History of Britain, though. This one here, which has sold quite nicely, apparently. Now, it's only since he published this most recent work, West, Tales of the Lost Lands, that he's been asked if he was aware of how influential Pender's Fen was on him. And when he stopped to think about it, he thought, oh my goodness, yes, definitely. He'd not been conscious of the influence, but immediately realised and acknowledged that it had been enormous. So, the question we're asking this afternoon is, what's so special about that film? We hope to answer it by the end of the session. I'd like to begin with a reading by Martin of a short piece that gives this event its title. He calls it Mired in Pender's Fen.
Yeah, good, thanks, Rob. Yeah, this just puts a kind of context to why we're here today and how it all came about, which was by a strange little coincidence. So it won't take long, but yeah, it'll make things that come on later a bit clearer. So a few years ago, one of the readers for my latest book, West, Tales of the Lost Lands, came back to me with his synopsis and first impressions of the somewhat weird text. He was a lifelong friend, and so I was not too affronted when he commented that I was still stuck in Pender's Fen. I had not alluded to the 1974 play for today, directed by Alan Clark and written by David Rudkin for the text explicitly, but my friend was quite correct to discern the obscure connection. For this groundbreaking drama had indeed made a powerful impression on my consciousness as a boy, on the cusp of his 12th birthday, an impression which has persisted to this day and is quite evident in the strange phantasmagoria of tales I'd written. Then in September 2023, I was coming home on the M5 motorway with some friends from a speaking event at the Gloucester History Festival. As we approached Worcester, I looked out over the land and saw the exit sign for Pershore and the tiny village of Pinvin, Pender's Fen itself. For 10 years I'd worked this patch as a psychiatric social worker based in Great Malvern. I'd not been in the area for some years and commented about the play and its significance in my life, even though almost half a century had elapsed. Indeed, on one day, while trying to remain inconspicuous near to Pinvin until my police colleagues arrived, I'd found myself standing at the exact road junction where Stephen, the boy whose story is central to the film, discovers a road sign which has been misspelt as Pinfin. Intrigued, Stephen researches the place name and discovers that it is derived from Pender's Fen. The area was once home to King Pender of Mercia, the warlike pagan nation in the English Midlands in the 7th century, a character both fearsome and notorious, the last pagan king in England. In March 1974, I was a boy rather younger than Stephen, but no less troubled and confused, indeed somewhat more so. Within the year, I was to drift into juvenile delinquency, but like Stephen, as an only child, I too had my own private hobbies with which I distracted myself, and in particular ancient local history. I knew a bit about Pender, and so when I saw the play advertised in the Radio Times magazine, I marked it down as a must-see event. You know, we're back in the days when, you know, the cultural offer was kind of a bit less diverse than it is now. So everybody was kind of focused in on those three television channels back then. And I marked it down as a must-see event. So I assumed that it must contain much information about ancient Mercia and its heathen king. Something a bit exceptional in a time when regional history was not exactly at the forefront of television programming. So on March the 21st, 1974, my mother and I sat down eagerly to watch the play together. My father worked night shifts and so sadly missed it. Little did I know what I was letting myself in for. Nothing at all like what I'd anticipated, but so much more. A milestone in television drama which is still celebrated and widely admired to this day. It's now almost 50 years, in fact it's over 50 years now since I wrote this. Pender's Fen was first broadcast, but it still retains its magical grip on my psyche. Of course it was a different world back then, a different England. The miners had been on strike, bringing power cuts and industrial strife, which would install a Labour government until 1979. The following year, I was effectively expelled from school, and the alternative found for me was rather like Stephen's, though at the opposite end of Worcestershire. It was a white Anglo-Saxon Anglican place, where some of the teachers at least still wore gowns and mortarboards. Many of them were old enough to have seen service in the Second World War, exuding a stern authoritarianism. But beneath this superficial order and discipline, other primal forces were astir. The old order was breaking down. The centre could not hold. These are the forces which the young Stephen must confront. Forces intrinsic in the landscape itself. Spirits, if you will. What our pagan ancestors called land wights. The psychic conflict Stephen endures is generated both internally and externally. He is gradually becoming aware of his nascent homosexuality at a time when many gay people encountered cruel social intolerance and worse. He is adopted by a vicar and his wife and has been moulded by their strong Anglican traditions. His musical hero, Edward Elgar, exemplifies the pomp and circumstance inherent in the passing imperial order. But as Stephen discovers, had dark personal secrets of his own. Stephen befriends a childless couple in the village whose radical political stance begins to undermine his faith in the system which has established a secret military research base beneath the apparently bucolic countryside. This, by the way, was quite real. Now called Kinetic in Malvern, it was then the secretive Radar Research Institute. It still does not appear on Ordnance Survey maps. Despite the reassurances of his adoptive father, Stephen cannot keep the apparitions, the demons and angels from overwhelming him. His intuition of a heretical Manichaeism which will liberate him reaches its climax on the Worcestershire beacon, where the spirit of King Pender himself confronts him, adjuring him to embrace both the light and dark aspects of his personality.
Thank you. You became aware of a connection, almost entirely subconscious, between Pender's Fen and your own work, particularly West and Magical History of Britain. Can you tell a little bit more about that? Indeed, what was it in the television drama that made such a long-lasting impression on you?
Well, I guess the first thing was that I was quite excited about In the preceding week, I think on Play for Today, they would trail the next week's fair. And so I was aware it was coming for about a week, so I was looking forward to it. And obviously I was anticipating that it would be, at least to some extent, an historical drama. But in fact, as I say, it wasn't that. And it turned out to be something a lot more complex and expansive. So I was immediately fascinated by the sort of wider connections to Midlands history, art and landscape. So, for instance, when they resurrected the play in the early, it must have been the early 90s, was it?
Sometime in the 90s.
Channel 4 showed it again, which kind of kept it alive a bit. And David Rudkin did a brief introduction, the writer, with the Malvern Hills as his backdrop there, and spoke about the massive influence of that landscape on people like William Langland and Houseman. And of course Houseman in this book, West here, this is my sort of latest effort, this is a book really which tries to resolve the paradox between a region that, as we were saying the other day, it's not so much an illiterate one, but it is kind of anti-literate. But it's curious that despite that, it's also a region that's produced some of the greatest, writers in history. So there's something there. There's a bit of kind of mystery I wanted to look into. I knew that I'd produced a strange book there, which was, complex, and which mystified even me. It was a kind of enigma, as Elgar might have said, even to myself. I kind of suspected that there was subconscious cinematic influences on it, and I kind of suspected it might be Akira Kurosawa for a while. But then, during this incident on the M5, it kind of, the penny dropped for me then, and I did realise that that all along this play had kind of had a subconscious, it had kind of bled into my own consciousness, I think, really.
Yeah, the title of the play itself was the result of a strange coincidence, though, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. So what happened was David Rudkin and his wife had just moved into Pershall, near Pinvin, and one day she was coming back from work, and she got to a road junction, and there was a road sign there, and somebody had misspelt Pinvin as Pinfin, and she kind of wondered aloud to her husband whether perhaps local people actually pronounced it like that. So David Rudkin at that time was engaged to do the kind of Anglo-Saxon bits of a series called Churchill's People, which was based on the Churchill's history of the English-speaking peoples. And so he was quite obsessed, I think, at that time about Anglo-Saxon history and Mercia, and England, really, the history of England, because he's half Irish. So he researched the place name and found that it actually originally was Pender Fen, or Pender's Fen, and so that's how the play got its name.
So you yourself have had a very long obsession with Pender, and he's a key player in your book, The Anglo-Saxon Age, in which he, I think, doesn't always emerge in a completely sympathetic light. Could you tell us a bit more about what makes him such a powerful character for you?
Well, it's gone on a long time, over 50 years. He keeps cropping up in my life, not only with this play. I did a bit of work at the Staffordshire Hoard at Birmingham Museum, and that was kind of inspired by a private theory of mine, which I got from my father, that the Staffordshire Hoard was in fact part of Pender's tribute or treasure. We did a bit of a talk a few years ago about that, didn't we? And so, yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with Gerard Manley Hopkins. He says, you know, what you look hard at tends to look hard at you. And I think that might be the reason why he keeps cropping up. But I mean, he was a very important historical figure, especially for this area. The last pagan king of England, and one of the last in Europe. I mean, you're talking about the mid-7th century, and this area is still not Christianized. So that's quite strange, really. Maybe in parts of deeper Scandinavia, you know, people were not Christian, but apart from that, this was the last pagan kingdom. And he was quite obdurate about not converting to Christianity, though he was more tolerant than people might imagine. He did allow people to convert if they wished. His own son did so, but unfortunately was poisoned by his Christian wife. So eventually, I mean, he was quite an infamous character in the rest of the island because you know, he had a habit of invading other people's countries and stealing all their treasures, which doesn't tend to make one popular. And it's said Henry of Huntingdon, a folklorist, records that when he died, the children all over the rest of England, outside Mercia, used to sing a joyful little rhyme about him, about his demise. But yeah, for us really, a kind of a figure of some import, because it was he really who established Mercia. This is often forgotten as the kind of preeminent of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms for a couple of hundred years. So this was the most powerful region then in the whole country. Even London was part of Mercia.
There's a curious, if you like, sort of kudos to be someone who actually watched that original BBC broadcast on 21st of March 1974. But as a 12-year-old history nerd, were you not just a bit disappointed that it didn't quite say, it wasn't the historical drama you were looking forward to?
Well, no, not at all. The reason being was that, as I relate in West, at precisely that sort of time of my life, I was going through a pretty serious crisis myself, really. And not too dissimilar, in some ways very dissimilar, but in other ways quite similar to Stephen's struggles. And so I found a kind of empathy with him, because the same kind of almost supernatural experiences that he had, you know, they chimed with my own.
As you related in West,
Yeah,
at
yeah.
quite considerable length.
Yeah, I mean, what had come over to me even at an early age was that you know, history could become more than just letters on a page in a history book. That it still could resonate to the extent that it you know, it actually was operative in your real emotional life. You know. I mean, such things as haunted places. So yeah, this was a big part of my experience growing up. And for Stephen, that's a big part of his experience too, is that he experiences not just the coming of age in a kind of normal, average sense, but is assisted in this by spirits. And angels and demons. So this is quite a complex play that we're dealing with.
And of course, Stephen himself is played very, very memorably by an actor called Spencer Banks, who was in some really interesting TV drama at the time.
He was, yeah.
In fact, I think we'll move on and have a look at him. Here he is talking in his school debating society, but notice the way that at this stage, early on in the play, he's, well, shall we say, a little bit fixed in his views. Okay. So, with that one, say he's almost smug, I think it's fair to say. His school motto is the classical injunction, know thyself, which comes from Socrates. And he's terribly fond of these two campaigners for moral rectitude, who later, in the visions he has, as the play nears its climax, are shown to be something more like monsters or vampires in his dreams. How well does he, or is he at this stage too secure in his love of his country?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. I mean, he comes across as a kind of prick, really. His opinions seem kind of strangely out of date for the 1970s, though there is a reason for this, which I'll come back to in a moment. But yeah, he's very assured in his own opinions, but it's interesting because that builds up for what's to come. He's going to change in a big way through these kind of psychic experiences that he undergoes. The mother and father of England, as he calls them, is kind of the people he admires in that debate there, turn out to be something rather sinister. But yeah, Spencer Banks was really, a perfect fit for this role. And of course had been already a child star in Time Slip, which some people might remember. And of course, children's TV then was, it had a strange fixation on kind of time anomalies. There was Catweasel, Ace of Wands, Children of the Stones, things of that sort. But of course Spencer Banks had played a character in Time Slip. He's shortly to appear, by the way, on November the 3rd. He's now 70, believe it or not, at the MAC in Birmingham, where they're showing the film in a couple of weeks on the 3rd, so I'll come back to that in a while.
Yeah, we mustn't forget that at the end, remind people. You have got a chance to see it on a big screen, which I don't think hasn't happened very often before. So Stephen's opinions are, at the same time, they're quite precocious. He's talking in almost like an adult, but terribly out of date by the 1970s. Can you enlarge on that?
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the things I noticed at the time was that, my school fellows and I think at that time would have been listening to Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin, not Elgar. But there's a reason for this, which I only recently discovered, which is that originally the play, Rudkin's play, had been set in the 1950s, which many people overlooked this. Now, I'm not sure if it was completely sure of this, but I think that because it was under the aegis of the Play for Today slot, that it was felt that they should portray it as if it was taking place, contemporaneously, really, in the 1970s. So that may well account for the kind of oddity of his kind of persona vis-a-vis his other colleagues.
It has had a really, if you like, a positive impact on Stephen's alienation. The fact that with those hairstyles,
right,
his classmates were quite clearly listening to Sabbath. He is listening to the Dream of Gerontius, eh?
Yeah.
Not that I've got anything against the Dream of Gerontius. I listened to it first thing this morning to put me in the mood. Which I suppose, yeah, it's it also is a bit reminiscent of something from about the same time. Lindsay Anderson's If, isn't it? It's the kind of nothing like as brutal as Anderson's movie, but certainly that kind of militaristic rigidity at that school is there. Not so many schools like that left, are there?
No, and perhaps just as well, because I ended up going to one like that, and you know, it was it did seem anachronistic even then, you know. But yeah, it reminded me a bit of If at the time as well. And I'm sure that didn't escape Alan Clark, you know, who was a pretty savvy director.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, although we in this talk concentrate mainly on the kind of literary aspects of the play, because David Rudkin still lives locally, we shouldn't ignore, you know, the fact that this is a, you know, classic piece of cinema as well, you know, cinematography and brilliant music. It really hits the high spots, and I mean, what happened, I think, was that the producer, David Rose, was more or less given a carte blanche to do what he liked, you know, at Pebble Mill Studios in Birmingham.
Couldn't have done it if he'd been working down in London, perhaps.
Perhaps not, no, I don't think it would have happened. But I mean, what they decided they wanted was to do high art, which is, you know, why it's, I think, persistent, really.
Okay. Right, there is one central character in the film which is unchanging, and that's the landscape itself. Obviously, it's the Midlands, Mercia, Worcestershire, where, as you say, paganism, pre-literate paganism, hung on the longest. So, as you said, that's sometimes we get echoes of that in the sort of willful hostility to the written word that you do get in West Midlands culture, and yet at the same time, this is the West Midlands is the place that supposedly produced the greatest playwright and the greatest novelist, but it's just that Shakespeare and Marianne Evans hot-footed it down to London to have their careers.
Well, this is where English literature began, really. I mean, literally 3 miles downstream of here, with Laomon and people like that. So it is curious. It's as if an invisible veil has been drawn across the country, and thou shalt not appreciate literature, and possibly even the arts in general, has been a kind of verboten sign has been put up. And I think that really is a fact. I think that's something to do with the fact that this was where the Industrial Revolution began, and earlier than anywhere else in Britain.
Of course, you couldn't, for the sake of your family's survival, allow your kids to go to school after a certain age, because they need to bring home the bacon.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to talk something about the word? I suspect some people are going to be expecting this word. The word liminal. How is that relevant here, and what does it mean?
Well, it's a bit overused now, isn't it, in modern times, maybe. I certainly use it too much, but I think in this case it actually it's a worthy use of it, because I lived down in Malvern there for a while, and it really is a liminal landscape. And I mean, Mercia really does means borderland. So you know, it's just another way of saying the same thing, really. But those hills particularly, I mean, there's something odd there, because in Malvern, people speak of, you know, the other side of the hills, you know, towards Herefordshire, Cornwall, around there. They just call it Wales, and they don't mean any ironical, you know, sort of, there's no, you know, that's what they call it. And it is odd, those rocks, you know, that form the hills there are so old that there's no fossils in them. You know, and originally they say that what they were kind of islands in a tropical ocean, and when you kind of just squint at night, when you're there at twilight, you can imagine that you're in a sort of turquoise seascape. Really, it's a very odd place, and it conceals things beneath as well. I mean, we talked about the Radar Research Institute, which comes up in another guise in the play, is quite significant. And also under the hills is radon gas, which is really dangerous and causes lung cancer. And Malvern's got one of the highest incidences of lung cancer in Britain as a result. So it's a fitting place for the climax of the play, the Worcestershire Beacon, where this mother and father of England, these people come to adjure Stephen to become a kind of new messiah of a evangelical Christian cult, which he's by then not willing to do, but we'll come to that in due course.
Yeah, let's have another look at an early moment in the play where Stephen's certainties are once again challenged, and this takes us on to the subject of Manichaeanism.
That's the end of that one.
Worth saying that the actor playing Honeybone there was later to achieve national fame as the voice of Elgar the Cat in the radio comedy Ed Reardon's Week, if you've ever heard that. Same guy.
So involved with Elgar twice in his career.
So that scene introduces us to the idea of heresy, which is clearly something that the mother and father of England, who Stephen initially worshipped, they wholeheartedly endorse the notion that the other is automatically heretical. Was Manichaeanism actually a heresy?
No, actually, no. It wasn't. It was a religion in its own right. And in fact almost became the universal religion in the 3rd century. And it came out of Iran, where Mani, who was the prophet of it, was basically of Jewish parentage, but Iranian, with lots of Zoroastrian influences on him. And yeah, so eventually it did look as if it would become the universal religion for a while. And some people say it still exists in the foothills of the Chinese mountains in secret, but yeah, it gradually sort of died out in the West, mainly because the Christian church couldn't stand the competition, really. That was what it was. I mean, St. John's letter explicitly says that, that God is absolute light. So anything in Christian terms, these ideas would be heretical. So it had to be expunged, and was, but for other purposes of the drama, it just starts to disturb Stephen's certainties at just a time when he's quite vulnerable to what becomes a kind of psychosis, really.
One thing that's absolutely for certain is that those very certainties have not been instilled in him by his father, who's certainly not a bully. In fact, the Reverend Franklin is an extraordinarily sympathetic character, isn't he?
He is, yeah. And what I like about this play is that the characters just aren't like they would be now in a modern drama. They're very complex people, real, authentic. They're not stereotypes or hackneyed in any way, And Stephen's father is really his adoptive father, in fact, which is what leads to complications down the line.
We don't know that yet, of
Well,
course.
we don't know that yet. Yeah, I mean, he gently just tries to make him more tolerant and open-minded. I mean, he himself is open to Mr. Arm, the playwright who lives in the local village, who is a kind of alter ego, I guess, of David Rudkin himself. Even though his radicalism is kind of disapproved of intensely by Stephen, his father isn't in any way shocked by it. In fact, quite sympathetic. And he's very understanding about the elderly couple who's, you know, where the husband dies. And they're atheists, but I mean, he's still very respectful of them. He does his job as a parish priest, you know, in very difficult times, you know, as Christianity is a declining force, I guess.
Okay. So, Stephen's religious faith, it's going to become very troubled. I don't think he ever lets go of it. There's no sense of him abandoning Christianity, but I think his Christianity by the end might be something a lot more like his father's, mightn't it? It's certainly more open. And the appearance of Arne at the community debate means Stephen comes up against ideas and opinions which undermine the kind of narrow certainty we heard in the first clip. And this, of course, refers to the kind of political and economic strife in the early 70s. When you watched it back in 74, did that emerge clearly for you?
What, the political side?
The political side?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Play for Today, to be fair, was quite renowned for that. I mean, it's always got a kind of political edge to it. And Rudkin was no different, and explicitly said, you know, that this is a bloody political piece, you know. And is determined to sort of to get that aspect, you know, sort of to the fore. But yeah, I mean, you could not notice it. I mean, for instance, a month before the play was first broadcast, the Labour government came in February '74, and so this meant that instead of getting power cuts at about 10:30 at night, which would have precluded us even seeing the play in the first place, it could be broadcast without interference, you know what I mean, because the miners had gone back to work. So, and of course, the political scene, more widely geopolitically, you know, is just as grim as it is now, and for the same reasons, really. The Yom Kippur War had meant that the oil price had gone through the roof, and so there was rampant inflation. The miners were on short time. The Heath government couldn't hold together. So quite, you know, quite torrid times, really, politically, I think.
Okay. Well, we'll see that reflected now in another clip from the play, where we hear from Mr. Arne, a local playwright, and someone of whom Stephen initially really strongly disapproves. Well, despite Mr. Arne's speech in that extract, Pender's Fen at the time, and perhaps more recently, was thought of as a work rooted in things of sexuality, environmentalism. It was a piece, people thought, of folk horror. I say, what we've just heard, though, could just as easily have turned up in something by Edward Bond or David Edgar, I thought. Yet, if Arne is here speaking for Rudkin himself, maybe such themes are shown to be wholly compatible with, you know, the overtly political approach of most of the other dramas shown in the Play for Today slot. is perhaps Pender's Fen bridging the gap between something like Bond Saved and something like The Wicker Man?
I guess so. But I know that David Rudkin would not wish the political aspects of it to be downplayed because it was just such a feature of Arne's character. But the good thing about it, I think, is that he's not. I mean, some contemporary kind of reviews of Pender's Fen tend to overplay this. They call it a kind of exorcism of the political crises of the 1970s. Well, I don't know about that because it's a little bit too early on in the 70s for it to be that, really. It was actually filmed in 1973. So, yeah, it's a little early on. Also, Arne isn't a kind of doctrinaire Marxist type guy. He's not like Red Robbo or Arthur Scargill or anybody like that. He's like what E.P. Thompson, a Worcestershire historian, called an old Jack. So an old radical from an English tradition of radicalism, not one from Germany or Russia or anywhere like that. But also he kind of anticipates. I mean, there was an active Green movement, of course, in the 1970s. But I don't think it had quite got its skates on like it's got it today. It's not front and centre of our concerns. It was just one amongst many, and it was early days. Everybody still. I mean, people still burn coal in their fires then, and thus why the miners' strike was such an impact on people domestically. So. Yeah, he isn't in any way like that, Arne, I don't think. And again, like the character who plays Stephen's father, he really comes across as a real person, not as a sort of as a device in a drama.
So the thing is not just simply a piece of agitprop; it's visionary as well.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, of course, is you may think that someone like Arne doesn't belong in Worcestershire. This is, you've got your statues of Stanley Baldwin here and Edward Elgar. It's got a kind of twee, bucolic feel to it when people say Worcestershire, but actually it's a radical place going back many centuries. I mean, the Worcester Militia fought actually on Cromwell's side at the Battle of Worcester, not the other way around. So he's in a tradition which puts him, squarely in the sort of English radical tradition, and not some sort of red under the bed type character at all.
We've already seen that in the process of entering manhood, growing up, Stephen's helped along the way. There's some pretty deep thinkers, Mr. Arne, of course, and his father. There are other helpers too, and here Elgar really comes into the picture. We have these spirits of Edward Elgar, who materialises in a ruined house, and King Pender, who explodes into the play at the end on top of Malvern Hill in a very fiery vision. They're spectres, and they are inherent in the landscape itself. Now, in your work, you describe such figures as land wights, or perhaps I should be pronouncing that land wights. Can you say a little bit more about that concept?
Yeah, I mean, in an ancient landscape like this, you've got traditions going back to all our ancestors, really, the Anglo-Saxon Mercians, the Celts, the Norse invaders, and it was from the Norse invaders that this word comes, land, that they were called. And so the conception is that landscape features like rivers, mountains, stone formations, even individual trees, forests, are actually spiritual entities. So the land itself kind of contains within itself these spiritual possibilities, and that applies to the deceased as well in their sort of traditions. So someone like Elgar and Pender isn't entirely lost to the culture. They're still there, kind of vestigially, spiritually, and so what Stephen is doing in the process of playing Elgar's music every day and checking out the place name of the village he lives in, is he's kind of subconsciously evoking, he's doing a kind of act of magic which will evoke these spirits into his actual consciousness at some point. And in the 70s, this was a very big theme in particularly British cinema, so which is now known as folk horror. I actually think it goes back quite a lot further than that in cinema, but the kind of trilogy of films that people cite is The Wicker Man is one, the other one is Witchfinder General, and you know, there were a few others, weren't there? What were the other ones, Richard?
A lot of people often reference, let me think, Blood on Satan's Claw.
Blood on Satan's Claw, of course, that's
question.
one of my favourite.
More recently, of course, you've had things like A Field in England, which is very much in the same tradition.
And Straw Dogs, maybe. And of course in literature, particularly children's literature at the time, this was paralleled with people like Alan Garner, with the Owl Service and Redshift, and more recently with Treacle Walker, his latest one. And the theme is that some it's about unburying the past. Artifacts from the past of some sort will evoke kind of strange outcomes. So think of those films, and that sort of brings to mind this idea of folk horror. And Pender's Fen is now cited as a classic folk horror film. I think that's about right, really. I think it is.
Yeah,
It is quite grim in places, actually. I mean, we don't show those ones here very much, but there are some pretty kind of spooky parts to it.
definitely. And it's a genre that goes back at least as far as Last of the Valerii, the Henry James story, which was quite ingeniously reworked by Nigel Neal into Quatermass and the Pit. In the James version, the people who dig up an ancient Roman statue in their back garden begin to act like ancient Romans themselves. Interestingly, Quatermass and the Pit, with the different spellings of Hobbs Lane, is a precursor to what goes on in Pender's Fen, with Pinfin, Pinfin, Pinderfen, and then ultimately Pender's Fen. This might be the way how the play seeped into your subconsciousness for so long. But I happen to know that there were quite a few other influences on West, which you could also say come into the category of folk horror.
Yeah, well, one was obviously Voice of the Fire by Alan Moore. Well, you can say more.
In which a murder taking place in 4000 BC casts a shadow over the whole area in which it takes place, the whole which becomes the town of Northampton, and nobody's ever free of this dreadful, cruel crime here. In that story, an outcast Down syndrome sufferer is sacrificed, and that's basically a ritual that is dedicated to founding the town. It's founded on that. It blessed with the blood of this poor unfortunate, and of course the guilt hangs on. Another influence of yours, I think, is Guy Gavriel Kay.
Yeah, Canadian writer, and his technique is he kind of he creates a kind of not quite exact simulacrum of history. So you sort of think you're in the history, you know, but in fact you're not. It turns out as you proceed, you're in something that's almost it, but not quite. And there's another fellow, this time an American, Rodrigo Garcia Robertson, who was a professor of history.
His stuff I don't know.
Yeah, well, he's not well known over here. But the thing is he's a good writer and it's very precisely historically researched. But then a point comes at which it kind of just shifts into, otherworldly fantasy, really. And it's a technique I quite like, and which I started to use in West a bit myself. So that was an influence. But I mean, of course, we're talking a lot about what I do. What about your folk horror influences?
Well, I'll put my hand up and say that just like you and like quite a few other people, I've taken on a fascination with the landscape. And I believe that the landscape becomes integral to people's characters, their attitudes, their ways of believing. I also think that it's wrong of a writer to impose an absolute in our current age, absolute standards of right and wrong and how we're meant to react to the events of a story. I'm a writer. I tend to write through the voices of individual characters within my own novels. I don't say which of them is right. But as I say, with me, it's certainly the landscape that is most important. And I think, like David Rudkin, like you, and like recent contemporary writers such as Joel Lane and Kerry Hadley Price, I'm involved with the local landscape. I'm happy to remain uncertain whether the word magical is metaphorical or a literal description of my relationship with the place. You know, when Hadley Price suggests that there's things with tentacles in Stourbridge Canal, or I suggest that the railway stations between Birmingham Snow Hill and Blakedown are analogous to the Tree of Life of Jewish mystical tradition, we're joking, sort of. No, honestly, if you think about it, the abyss halfway between the top three and the others aligns with the disused Smethwick West Station. Makes you think, doesn't it? And of course, you know, right at the top you've got Snow Hill, which is, the great white light that surpasses all understanding. And I think, for a lot of people, Birmingham does surpass all understanding. But there's little doubt that one way, I think I love about it, is that it's just one way of approaching Pender's Fair is as a work of folk horror. But it's also viewed as a classic political and religious drama. An early influence on the environmental movement. I can't help noticing some things it's got in common with the later Edge of Darkness. And more latterly, it's been seen by some people as a pioneer of queer films. It was screened the year before Derek Jarman's first film, Sebastiane, was made. In St. Louis, Missouri, the film was recently shown at a queer movie convention to celebrate its 50th anniversary. Would you say that it does fall into that tradition to some extent?
Well, yeah, but I tend to think of it as a queer film in the old-fashioned sense, you know, because it is. It's very strange, odd, unusual. Time is kind of flexible. It's polychronistic. There's all sorts of oddities about it, and of course, his nascent homosexuality is important because he's kind of the last person to know, you know.
Yes.
His parents know, guessed already. His classmates know. His schoolmaster knows. But it's only just kind of dawning on him in the form of, you know, night dreams and fantasies about one of his schoolfellows in particular. And another about his milkman, Joel, who's quite an important character. Yeah, I guess at the time it would have been... the problem with this is that in the 1950s it would have had much more serious consequences being gay, I think, than in the 1970s. You know, that it was a more open time than it had been in the 1950s, I guess. At least you were, you know, legal.
In a school like that, I think it would still be potentially dangerous.
Well, it was because, I mean, in the one scene, of course, which anticipates Alan Clark's other film, Scum, which people might have seen, you know, Stephen is subjected to a mass attack by his comrades. And ridiculed and humiliated. But, you know, the process doesn't actually do him any harm, really. It seems to harm them rather than him. He seems kind of more confident after that incident than they do. And they seem kind of ashamed of themselves, as they ought to be, really, I think. So, yeah, I mean, it was definitely a theme, but I think it can probably be a bit too overplayed now, because sort of sexual identity politics is so much more prominent now than it was then, you know.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think I want to say a couple of things about the character Joel, the milkman, who you've already picked out, very important. He is, and one of my favourite things about the play, he is such a lovely bloke, in that he is a straight man who is able to spot the fact that Stephen is gay. He sets up the barriers, that's all, in other words, no, I'm not going to be your boyfriend, but at the same time he is in no way hostile to Stephen, you know, that's you, that's me. It's something that I think even, well, interesting, and I think later queer cinema has struggled to show somebody being not gay, and at the same time tolerant, accepting, perfectly friendly, but setting up those barriers. Really interesting in that sense. Moving on though, you obviously don't think the sub-theme or you didn't think it was particularly shocking or disturbing when you watched it at the time?
No, it just seemed to me, really, that particular aspect was just part of his coming of age pains, and it could just as easily have been any other sort of thing that obsessed him, you know what I mean? But it being that one, you know, it didn't seem, you know, it seemed to me perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, we'll move on and actually have a look at that scene with Joel the milkman, which is quite possibly my favourite in the film. Well, if you were curious as to why we keep saying that Pender's Fen is frequently mentioned in the same breath as the Wicker Man, now you know.
Where was that film? What was that property they used?
Ah, you know this, don't you?
I've forgotten the name of it now. It was on my patch, and in fact I used to have a client who was a gardener there.
Was it Ruth Lynch? He looks a bit like Grasslands.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it could be one of those. Definitely, it's in that
Near the lake.
next to the woods.
There's several villages, isn't
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
there? Ramslench.
Oh.
So which haven they call it, don't they? Uh,
Yes.
Anyway, the scene that we just watched is one of those in the play that really does make a lot of the music of Elgar. Discovered this interesting little paragraph in a book of assorted stuff about Pender's Fen, written by the saxophonist John Hall, whose work some of you may know. We got to put our hands up here. We are not musicians, so aren't really able to talk about that aspect of the play with very much authority. But because it's so important, get Mr. Hall to help us out here. What he says is, David Rudkin's use of the music of Sir Edward Elgar in Pender's Fen is a unique example of the methods by which music can deliver more clarity and meaning to a film than simply emotional and dramatic support. And it's a prime example of music creating a discrete extra dimension to the viewer's experience. Much conventional film music isn't often noticed, being interwoven with dramatic content to create a structure of emotion, but the deliberate separation of the narrative and music, as in Pender's Fen, often has the effect of the music becoming an insightful commentator on the drama, similar to the function of a Greek chorus. With both diegetic and underscore functions, the music of Pender's Fen seems to be an almost autonomous being, having the gift of ubiquity. It's all over the play, similar to an acousmetra voice, where the music has the power of seeing all. Now, Rudkin's choice of Elgar was clearly entwined with the film's conception, and the shattering musical opening, an extract from Elgar's Dream of Gerontius, has the effect of revealing the landscapes of the Malvern Hills to have hidden depth of symbolic meaning. Okay, so
just say a little bit, Richard, about the book. This book has only just been published, really.
Oh, it's only recently got to be available on print on demand. It's called Of Mud and Flame. Now, at the time Martin was making his mind up to do a talk at an afternoon on Pender's Fen, this thing wasn't easily found. It's now easily gettable on Amazon, and there is a wealth of detail about the play and about David Rudkin and Mr. Rose, who was the producer. Everything you want to chase up about the play, probably here, I would say. We'll move on to the disintegrations of Stephen's sense of normality. Now, this has been mediated by debates with his father and with Mr. and Mrs. Arne, by his doubts about the kind of Christianity that he's previously embraced, and by his dreams and vision. But then he gets to the 18, and what happens then?
Well, this is all a bit like the Mayor of Casterbridge, really, is that he gets confronted with a letter from his real parents, marked not to be opened till Aston's 18th birthday, and discovers that his adoptive parents are just that, you know. So a sudden big shock, and what this means is that his kind of preconceptions about himself and his place in the landscape and the world are very misplaced. You know, he's not actually English, it turns out. He has no, what he calls chemical connections anymore to the landscape, and is kind of cast adrift a bit really. And once the cat is out of the bag, so to speak, you know, he's in a space where, you know, anything's possible. And his father does what he can to reassure him during the long walk, where they converse a lot about Pender, about Joan of Arc, all sorts of kind of long conversations, which kind of have implications for, you know, his own kind of spiritual journey, really. You know, I think, you know, this is the point at which he's kind of unleashed now as a person. I mean, his name Franklin means freeman, but it's only now really that he's kind of free.
The irony is that this revelation, it's the catalyst for this humanisation of somebody who's been not at all sympathetic up to that point, quite a waspish young man. I mean, after the village hall debate, he says cruelly to his mother that he thinks Mr. and Mrs. Arne are childless as a divine punishment for them being unnatural. Now, of course, he realises the implications for this for his adoptive parents, and terribly contrite, he goes round to see Mr. and Mrs. Arne, and is now awfully helpful to them. Tries to befriend the childless Mr. Arne. It's a tender scene in which issues of sexuality and adoption are discussed. I think David Rudkin said that was his favourite scene in it.
No, it was Alan Clark.
Alan Clark said
yeah, because I mean, it's a lovely moment because, you know, it takes place in a garden, and ironically what they're discussing is fertility, you know, issues of fertility and childlessness and stuff of that sort. So yeah, it comes over very well, you know, that suddenly he becomes a kind of human, speaks human a bit, and is much more sort of approachable and balanced as a human being, and his prejudices have just wilted away. So yeah, so it was Alan Clark's favourite moment, so he says.
And of course, Mrs. Arne responds to that extremely well when he says, you know, can homosexuals be parents?
Yeah, and she, you know, encourages him in that, as he encourages her, you know, to become an adoptive mother. You know, whereas he's been quite cruel hitherto, you know.
And this self-knowledge, this hope in a more inclusive, imagined future is what makes him rejects the blandishments of those figures who obviously are meant to be real characters, but their presence in his mind is that of a possibly just a fantastical, a dreamlike, or perhaps a satanic or devilish force, the supposed mother and father of England, who claim to kind of want to adopt him in a more sinister manner.
Yeah, and that's where you get the, you know, the epic climax on the Malvern Hills, you know, which is lives long in the memory, really, where he rejects their approaches, and you know, the mother and father of England, particularly the mother, is revealed to be a very sinister, quite hideous character, really, and very destructive. She takes a photograph of Stephen and burns the photograph, and as he burns and starts to smoulder, as the photograph burns, so does he. And it's at that point that he has to call out to Pender, the spirit of, to save him from the fate worse than death.
Which he does, then. We'll have a look at that scene now.
Excuse me, just before you show the clip, I'm ever so sorry. If there is anybody who needs to use the lift to get out of the building, I'm afraid we will have to ask you to leave now. We've got an issue with the lift. The engineer has been waiting for some time to keep it operating. I'm ever so sorry to disrupt the presentation, but we really do need to let you know So if there is anybody who needs to leave, please do so now. Great,
We're okay.
that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're right. This is the last clip anyway. Perhaps this is the right point to add that I don't think I've ever come across a play or film that makes such interesting use of silence or near silence. As with the dream sequence where the children were having their hands cut off, there are moments, long moments, when there's almost nothing going on in the ear, which of course makes the impact of things like Elgar's music even more affecting. Now, the scene we've just watched, it would not have seemed strange in the context of the children's drama of the time. Programmes like Ace of Wands or Children of the Stones were doing that sort of thing practically every episode. But to find it in something like, well, something in the play for today's slot must have been astonishing at the time. What do you think it's trying to tell us?
Well, it's I think one of the interesting things in that speech that Pender makes, he says, and I and all the other guardians of the flame are driven from our home, up and out into the wolf's jaw. But the flame still flickers in the fen. Now, this reference, I think, is again, I've said, that he was writing the Anglo-Saxon bits in Churchill's People at the time. And the wolf's jaw references to Fenrir, which is the Norse doom wolf that will devour Odin at Ragnarok, which is the end time, the apocalypse. So I think, what's being kind of postulated there is that Pender's time has ended, centuries before his civilization went down, Christianity supervened. Now roles might be being reversed, it's Christianity's turn, it seems, to kind of disappear, and maybe paganism's time to re-emerge. And that's, to some extent, up to Stephen and what he does with his future. And that's uncertain, it's left in the air as he's walking down the Worcestershire Beacon. But, 50 years later, you know, that's got implications for how we see it all, I think.
Yeah. Here we are, part of the future of Pender's Fen. People often say that though such a play might be written now, no theatre would stage it and no television channel could possibly think of screening it. Mainstream culture is too dumbed down and economically cautious to take a chance on a piece of such extraordinary individuality. Can a film like this still be relevant? And does the flame still flicker in the fen?
Well, I don't know that we can say with certainty any more than you could in 1974 as the play came to an end. And I guess the implications for us is that personally and geopolitically, you know, we may well be on the verge of annihilation. You know, this isn't a happy message, but there it is. And a great deal of that is going to be up to us. But I think it says something about, you know, the staying power of this piece of art, is that it still influences a lot of young people now. These events in honour of David Rudkin and Alan Clark have taken place all over the country, all over Europe. There have been you know, conventions in the United States, I gather. The book has been published. And I don't think that there are many plays for today that you could say that about 50 years on.
Probably it's one of the top three, I would have thought. This, Abigail's Party, and Gangsters probably were the three that still get watched.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So the past is never past, it never did, it's not even past.
That's William Faulkner, yeah. That's my belief.
Okay. Okay, we're getting towards the close of our commemoration of this 50th anniversary of first broadcast of Pender's Fen. If anybody would like to come up and have a word, please do. Martin's books are for sale, my books are for sale, but if you're strapped for cash, perhaps you should save your pennies and get yourself a cinema ticket, because Pender's Fen itself is finally getting a big screen outing just a few hundred yards from where it was produced, over at the Mac in Birmingham, very, very close to Pebble Mill Studios, from which it was planned and masterminded. Now that is taking place, I think, on the afternoon of
Sunday the 3rd of November, 4 o'clock.
Sunday the 3rd of November, 4 o'clock. I'm certainly hoping to be there. There you will find loads.
Spencer Banks is there as well.
Oh, indeed.
Yeah, he's 71 now, unbelievably.
You will, I think we both admit, find any number of things and aspects of that play that we have not touched on this afternoon. But we hope we've given you a few starting points for your own exploration of this extraordinarily influential piece. Thank you. Wasn't that the Wednesday? Yeah, the one before.
What are you working on?
I hadn't thought of that.
So long.
This is the